Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today I'm going to remove the color from a hot pink shirt, at least part of the color, and then I'm going to dye a Protractor double side fanfold on the shirt. I'm starting with a hot pink shirt, and the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to center the shirt. And this process is going to go really fast. But down below this video, in the description for the video, I have a link to another video which shows how to center a shirt. Essentially what I'm doing is getting both halves of the fabric on the front of the shirt right up next to each other, and the same thing for the back. That way, whenever I apply the dye or do any other processes to the shirt, when the shirt's completed and you look at the front, both halves of the front of the shirt are going to look very much the same, and the same thing with the back. Okay, now that I have the shirt centered, I'm going to find an area not very far below the armpit of the shirt, and that's where I'm going to begin the center of my double fanfold. I'm going to use a washable marker, and I've taken and wrapped the washable marker in an old piece of sinew. I made a mark where I'd like for the center of that fanfold to be. Then, using the piece of sinew and a washable marker, I'm going to draw part of an arc or part of a circle on the shirt. I'm going to do the same thing a little bit further on the shirt. I'm really not going to use these lines a whole lot. These are just for my reference. My protractor is a really large protractor, which I got from Harbor Freight. And I'm going to place the zero of the protractor on the mark that I drew near the armpit of the shirt. I'm going to have to drop the protractor down just a little bit though, so that my 180 degree and my 0 degree marks are both on the actual shirt. Then I'm going to make a line every 20 degrees using my washable marker. And I'm going to make sure and rotate that protractor so that I get marks lined up on the side of the shirt too, like where the sleeve is. Then, using a straight edge and my washable marker, I'm going to extend these lines all the way from that center point out to the very edge of the shirt. Now I'm going to begin to make my fanfolds in the shirt. And what I'm going to do is every line that I drew on the shirt, that is going to be the top of a fanfold. So I'm going to pinch along that line, and I'm going to try to continue that fanfold all the way down to the starting point of my design. So where I drew that initial line or that initial mark. And as I fold more of the shirt, I'm going to start pinching the lines and bringing them to my one folded area. In the beginning, when you just are dealing with the very few fanfolds, it's easy to kind of keep them upright. As I go on, I lay the shirt down on its side and I continue pinching and then folding it in to the previous fold. I'm going to continue this process until I have all of the shirt fan folded. So I drew the arcs on the shirt because that's the way I traditionally fanfold. But I don't make all the fanfolds exactly the same. When you do a protractor fold like this, it's really precise. I mean, you can get your folds really close to being identical. When I do regular fanfolds where I just kind of freehand a fanfold, normally my folds are much smaller and they're generally close in size, but they're not as precise as using a protractor. But when I'm finished, my arcs that I drew on the shirt ought to be pretty close to straight lines. They're kind of a backup plan to see if I've done it correctly. Once I have the shirt folded, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of clips on just a few of the folds that keep wanting to unfold before I move on to the next step. Next, I'm going to use a washable marker and a straight edge, and I'm going to draw a line about every 2 inches. These are just some guidelines for me to know where to place my sinew lines. Now, you can either do this precisely by drawing guidelines, or you can just eyeball it, or you can apply lines wherever you want to. Because I'm going to remove part of the color from this shirt, where I'm placing a sinew line is where I want the pink to remain. I'm using artificial sinew for this project because wherever I place an artificial sinew line and I wrap it around several times, I pull it really gently until the sinew starts to catch on itself, and then I continue pulling until I can't pull it anymore, and the sinew will grab hold of the other sinew line underneath it and it will lock down on the fabric. When that happens, it's going to form a barrier on the shirt where that sinew line is that won't allow the color remover or dye or anything else under that area. So that's the part of the shirt that's going to remain pink. After I wrap a sinew line around an area and I pull it until it catches and locks down on itself, sometimes I will go ahead and repeat that process and do that a couple of times in one area. So I make my line pretty thick or pretty large, especially when I'm doing reverse dyes or taking the color out of a shirt like this. Because if I did not wrap these really, really tight where they actually lock down on themselves and keep the dye remover out, when I stick this shirt down inside of the Out White Brite color remover that I'm going to use, it's going to take all the color out of the shirt. I won't have any pink left, and I'm just going to have whatever color the fabric ends up after it goes through the color remover. And I really want those definition lines in the shirt. That's the whole purpose of doing a reverse dye, is it makes a really cool effect to have colored lines and then a different color in the body of the shirt. Okay, so for the color removal process, I'm going to use a product called Out White Brite Laundry Whitener, and it works really quickly, but it needs to have boiling water to work. So I've got a couple of really large pots of boiling water boiling on my stove and ready to go. And normally when I do this process, I do a whole bunch of shirts all at once. So I've tied up a whole bunch of shirts to remove the color from them. I have them all down inside of a plastic tote, and I have 2 pots of boiling hot water ready to pour over the top. I am going to begin by sprinkling the Out White Brite powder over the top of the shirts, and I like to do this process outside, and I always wear a respirator when I do this process because the Out White Brite powder is very fine and I don't want to inhale it or any of the fumes from it. It isn't super stinky, but I don't really want that smell inside of my dye space, so I always do it outside. After I have the Out White Brite over the top of all the items, I'm going to begin by pouring one of the containers of really hot water over the top. And if you notice, the minute that boiling hot water hits the Out White Brite, it starts to foam and immediately starts to remove the color. This hot pink shirt is at the very top of the screen in the container. After I poured the first pot of boiling hot water over the top, I went back to my kitchen to get the second pot of boiling hot water and decided I was going to go ahead and add just a little bit more Out White Brite over the top of the items before adding the next boiling hot water pot. I've got a lot of items in this container, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of Out White Brite, and I want to ultimately add enough boiling hot water to cover each item if at all possible. And I'm just about there. Most items are fully submerged underneath the Out White Brite solution. I'm using a cheap pair of metal tongs, which I purchased from the Dollar Tree dollar store, to move the items around in the hot water. I've sped this video up for time's sake, but this whole entire process of removing the color probably only took about 15 minutes in the Out White Brite. So it really does work quickly. After each of the items looked like the color was removed from them, I was sure they were well saturated, I went ahead and took my tongs and I took each item out individually because I had so many, and would take them to my sink in my garage, rinse them out really well in cold water, and then I put them in my washing machine. Once I had all of the items rinsed and in the washing machine, I put a little bit of Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent into the washer and washed them using a cold water cycle. By the way, I left everything tied through this whole entire process. Then I took the items straight out of the washing machine and placed them down inside of my soda ash solution bucket. I had to do them in batches because I had so many shirts. And I also don't ever put these in a fresh batch of soda ash solution. Even though I rinsed and washed the shirts, there's still usually a little bit of residue in a shirt that has been previously dyed or had the color removed that will come out into the soda ash solution. There's a little bit of smell that comes with it and usually a little bit of color. It will either make it, in this case, if you're using blue items like I am, that can have a blue hue to the soda ash solution. I don't think it necessarily hurts anything, but I don't like to contaminate my fresh soda ash solutions. In this case, I don't have a lot of soda ash left. I've been dyeing a whole bunch of items, and so I'm down to just kind of the last little bit. And so I was getting ready to make a new batch of soda ash anyway, so I just decided to place all of these down inside of that solution, and then whatever was left over, I got rid of after I soaked these reverse dyed items. Once this shirt was soaked in a soda ash solution, I placed it aside and I let it dry out completely. This design doesn't necessarily have to be completely dry before you dye it. It just happened I had so many items I was working on. This one just did get dried out before I went ahead and applied the dye. Okay, so now let's go ahead and ice dye this item with some purples and some blues. I figured with the pink lines, those two colors would look really cool on this shirt. So for my setup, I have a piece of vinyl guttering and I've placed the shirt down inside of the vinyl guttering. And then around the end of the shirt, I'm going to tie a piece of kite string and then attach the kite string to the top end of the guttering with a metal clip. That'll help keep the shirt from sliding down out of the guttering when I incline it. Which, by the way, you don't have to incline this shirt. I just kind of always do these designs at an incline, and so I thought I would go ahead and incline this one. I didn't get quite the same effect because I've tied the shirt with sinew lines as tightly as I've tied them as I do when I just do kite string to tie the shirt. The dye flows better with a kite string tie than with the sinew lines. So if I were doing this design again for ease, I would probably not incline it. Then because the shirt is completely dry, I'm going to spray it with a soda ash solution that I've placed down inside of a spray bottle. That will help for the dye to stick a little bit better to the top. I'm going to alternate applying purples and blues to the shirt, and I'm going to place one color in each one of the sections. So let me tell you the colors that I'm going to use. I'm using Royal Purple from Dye Spin, Royal Blue from Dharma, Plum, Blueberry, Imperial Purple, those are all Dharma colors, followed by Cornflower Blue from Dharma, which is a special order color. That color you can still get from Dharma, but you have to buy it in large quantities. Otherwise, I have a link down below this video in the description to a Facebook group called Tie-Dye Supplies Marketplace. You can usually find Cornflower Blue and some of the other special order colors out on that Facebook group or in that Facebook group. After the Cornflower Blue, I'm using Elderberry from Dye Spin and Sapphire Blue from Dharma. Then the only color I'm going to repeat right at the very end is Royal Purple from Dye Spin. I've sped this part of the video up quite a bit, but if you at any point want to either speed up or slow down this video, you can click the settings button on YouTube and it will allow you to choose your playback speed. You can speed it up or slow it down, whichever one's more comfortable for you. After I have the dye on the shirt, I'm going to apply a little bit of additional dry soda ash over the top, and then I'm going to add on a layer of ice. Then to incline the shirt, I've taken a plastic tote and I'm going to place one end of the piece of vinyl guttering down in the end of the plastic tote and leave the other end hanging off the edge. That's going to place the shirt at an incline. I placed this tote aside and I allowed the ice to melt. And after the ice melted, I had quite a bit of undissolved dye left sitting on top, which I expected because I added a lot of dye to the top of the shirt. So I came back and added a second layer of ice to the top. And after that layer of ice melted, I checked the back just to make sure the dye had gone through to the back side. It looked like it had, and so I took this piece of vinyl guttering out, placed it inside of a plastic tote with a lid, put the lid on the tote, and then I just allowed the shirt to process. I left it for about 48 hours before I began rinsing it. So to rinse the shirt, I began rinsing it in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. I warmed the water up to hot and rinsed it in hot water to try to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. I untied the shirt, and then instead of just deciding to rinse in hot water for a long time, I went ahead and soaked the shirt. To do that, I placed some really hot water in my utility sink, added a little bit of Blue Dawn dish soap to the water. I placed the shirt inside, and I just allowed it to soak. When the water cooled off, I changed it out, and I continued that soaking process until my water was remaining almost clear. Now, whenever I do things with blue, it seems to take forever to get the blue to soak out. So don't be discouraged if you're changing out your water and you have to soak your shirt for a really long time. After the water was remaining almost clear, I took the shirt and I placed it inside of my washing machine, and I washed it using a hot water cycle and a little bit of Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent. Okay, so I've washed, dried, and ironed the shirt, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? I think this one looks really cool. You know, these reverse dyes always surprise me because I leave them tied through the whole process. So I have no idea what I'm going to get or what to expect until I fully untie the shirt at the very end. And I think this one looks really cool. I love the hot pink lines. This is such a bright pink, and then paired with the purple and the blue, I just really think they stand out. So the lighter blues that you see right in the very center of the shirt, I think that's the cornflower blue, and that is more of a mild blue. That is probably the lightest color on the shirt. As far as the dye movement goes, if you remember me saying at the beginning of the video, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't have inclined the shirt. Well, this is the reason why. When you tie the sinew lines as tightly as I did on this shirt, the dye is not going to move a whole lot, even if you incline it. It may move a little, but not much. So for the most part, it would have just been easier to do this shirt without doing an incline on it, because the sinew lines kind of stop that dye from moving down the shirt a whole lot. So if you're going to do something like this, keep that in mind. Don't mess with the hassle that it is to incline it. I would have gone ahead and maybe put it in the guttering, because the guttering is a great way to make yourself an ice barrier, but I don't know that I would have put it at an incline. But I personally love the shirt. Overall, I think it looks really cool, and I really love the color contrast, and I'm really happy with it. But what do you guys think? Drop me some comments down below and let me know. And if you've enjoyed the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it, and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.